The ferry captain didn't say much during the 2-hour crossing to Redemption Island. Just pointed out landmarks when we passed them. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald somewhere beneath us, a shipping lane to the north, the rocky shoals that had claimed a dozen vessels over the years. Lake Superior stretched in all directions, gray-blue and endless under the October sky. When the lighthouse finally came into view, a white tower rising from bare rock and stunted pines, he cut the engine and let us drift toward the dock. "You sure about this?" he asked as I gathered my bags. 6 months is a long time to be alone out here. I looked at the island, at the lighthouse standing solitary against the vast lake. Alone was exactly what I needed. "I'm sure," I said. He helped me unload my supplies onto the dock. Boxes of canned goods, propane tanks, batteries. Everything I'd need to survive until the next resupply in 4 weeks. The lighthouse keeper's quarters were attached to the tower, a small 2-story structure with peeling white paint and windows that looked out over the water. The captain handed me a weathered clipboard. "Sign here. Coast Guard will check in by radio once a week. Emergency channel is monitored 24/7, but use it only for real emergencies. Weather reports due every morning at 0800. Maintenance log needs to be kept current. Any problems with the automated systems? There's a manual in the operations room." I signed my name, Sarah Chun, and dated it October 15th. "Resupply boat comes back November 12th, he continued. "Storm season's coming, so if the lake's too rough, might be delayed a few days. You got enough food to stretch if needed?" "I'll be fine." He nodded, studying me with the look of someone who'd seen plenty of people think they wanted isolation until they actually got it. Previous keeper left in a hurry. Marcus Webb, good man, kept detailed logs. Place should be in decent shape. "What happened to him?" The captain's expression shifted, something uncomfortable crossing his face. "Officially, lost at sea. Went out in his boat one morning 6 months ago and never came back. They found the boat drifting empty 2 days later. Never found him." He paused. "But between you and me, something wasn't right those last few weeks. His radio reports got strange. Paranoid, talking about following procedures, about rules. Coast Guard thought maybe the isolation got to him. I thought about my own reasons for taking this job, for volunteering to spend 6 months alone on a rock in the middle of Lake Superior. After David died, after the funeral and the empty condolences and the return to a house that echoed with absence, I needed to get away. Far away. The lighthouse keeper position had appeared in my search like a gift. Isolated, temporary, requiring no special skills beyond basic maintenance, and the ability to tolerate solitude. "I'll be fine," I said again. The captain shrugged and returned to his ferry. I watched him navigate back toward the mainland until the boat was just a speck on the horizon, then turned to examine my new home. The island was small, maybe half a mile across at its widest point, all exposed bedrock and scattered pines bent horizontal by constant wind. The lighthouse dominated the highest point, its white tower rising 80 feet above the water. The keeper's quarters were surprisingly comfortable inside. 1 bedroom upstairs, a kitchen and living area downstairs, a small bathroom with a shower that ran on collected rainwater. The furniture was old but sturdy, the walls decorated with maps and nautical charts. A wood stove sat in one corner, a stack of split logs beside it. I spent the rest of that first day unpacking and familiarizing myself with the systems. The lighthouse was fully automated, its light programmed to activate at sunset and rotate through the night. My job was simply to maintain the equipment, keep the generators fueled, report weather conditions, and ensure the light never went dark. Simple work, quiet work, exactly what I needed. That night, I lay in the small bedroom upstairs, listening to the lake. Waves against rock, wind through the pines, the distant groan of the lighthouse mechanism beginning its nightly rotation. For the first time in 2 years, since the morning I found David unresponsive in our bed, dead from a brain aneurysm at 34 years old, I felt something close to peace. The next morning, I woke to gray light filtering through salt-stained windows. After my weather report to the Coast Guard, wind northwest at 15 knots, temperature 42 degrees, visibility good, I decided to explore the lighthouse tower itself. The operations room was on the ground floor, filled with equipment and control panels, everything labeled and organized. A metal staircase spiraled up through the tower to the light room at the top, with a massive Fresnel lens rotated on its motorized base. The view from up there was breathtaking. Water in every direction. The curve of the earth visible on the horizon, the mainland a distant smudge to the south. I spent an hour up there, watching waves and passing ships, before descending back to the living quarters. That's when I found the logs. They were in a cabinet in the operations room, leather-bound journals dating back decades. Each lighthouse keeper had maintained one, recording daily observations, maintenance performed, weather conditions, passing vessels. I pulled out the most recent volume, the one that would have been Marcus Webb's. The early entries were exactly what I expected, professional, detailed, methodical. Marcus had been a careful keeper, noting every minor repair, every weather system, every supply delivery. His handwriting was neat, his observations precise. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed the entries changing. The handwriting remained the same, but the tone shifted. Sentences got shorter. Words were underlined, some multiple times. And every seventh entry, I counted them carefully to be sure, was different from the others. Day 7, the first one read, "Follow the procedures. Everything secure. Light burning. No incidents." I flipped ahead. Day 14, procedures followed. Stayed inside after dark. It came again. Same pattern. Day 21, followed all protocols. Heard it circling. Did not look. Did not acknowledge. Stayed safe. I sat down at the small desk in the operations room. The journal opened in front of me and flipped to the end. The final entries were there, dated from 6 months ago, right before Marcus disappeared. The handwriting had deteriorated. Letters pressed so hard into the paper they'd nearly torn through. Day 168, 24th cycle. I followed the rules every time, every single time. But it's learning, changing, testing. The stones don't always hold. The lights flicker even with full fuel. I hear things that aren't from the lake. Voices I know. Day 175, 25th cycle. Today is day 7. I prepared everything. Stones placed, mirrors covered, door barred. But I'm tired, so tired of hiding, of pretending I don't see it, of following rules I don't understand. Below this, written in different ink like he'd added it later, was a list. 8 rules, numbered and underlined. Rule 1. Every 7th day after dark, something rises on the lake and circles the lighthouse. Do not acknowledge it. Do not look directly at it. Do not let it know you can see it. Rule 2. Keep every light in the lighthouse burning from sunset to sunrise on the 7th night. Darkness invites it closer. Rule 3. On the afternoon of the 7th day, before sunset, walk the island's perimeter clockwise and place a stone from the beach at each of the 4 cardinal points, north, south, east, west. This marks the boundary it cannot cross. Rule 4. Do not speak aloud from sunset on the 7th day until sunrise the next morning. Your voice draws its attention. Rule 5. Cover all mirrors and reflective surfaces before dark on the 7th day. It uses reflections to find you inside. Rule 6. Keep the lighthouse door barred from the inside, no matter what sounds you hear or what voices call to you. Rule 7. Do not look out any window facing the water after dark on the 7th night. Seeing it directly breaks the protection. Rule 8. If you hear your own voice calling from outside, do not answer and do not investigate. It mimics what it has learned. I read the rules 3 times, feeling cold despite the warm room. This was what the ferry captain had meant about Marcus getting paranoid. These weren't procedures. They were the ravings of someone who'd spent too long alone, who'd let isolation twist his perception of reality. But the rules were so specific, so detailed, and they were written with such desperate certainty, like Marcus had tested them, refined them, learned them through experience. The final entry was dated April 20th, 6 months ago. Just a few lines. Day 175. 7th day. I followed all the rules. Checked everything twice. But I hear her. I hear Emma calling from the rocks. My daughter. I know she's dead. Car accident 3 years ago. I was at her funeral. I buried her. I know it's not really her. But God help me. I want to see her one more time. I want to look. The page ended there. The rest of the journal was blank. I sat in the quiet operations room, holding Marcus Webb's journal, and felt the first prickle of unease. The ferry captain had said Marcus went missing 6 months ago. April, the same time as this final entry. I flipped through the journal again, counting. Marcus had been on the island for 175 days, 25 cycles of 7 days. And every 7th day, according to his increasingly frantic notes, something rose from the lake. I walked to the window and looked out at the water. It was afternoon now, the lake calm and beautiful, sunlight glinting off small waves. Nothing strange, nothing threatening. Just water and rock and sky. I thought about David, about how grief could make you see things that weren't there, hear voices that had gone silent. Marcus had lost his daughter, maybe being alone out here. He'd started imagining her voice, had created an elaborate mythology to explain the ordinary sounds of waves and wind. I was about to close the journal when I noticed writing on the inside back cover. Small letters, cramped and rushed, like Marcus had added them as an afterthought. To whoever comes after me, the rules are real. I know how they sound. I know what you're thinking. But they're real. Follow them. Every single one. Don't try to understand. Don't try to fight. Just follow the rules and you'll survive. I made it through 25 cycles. You can too. And whatever you do, don't look at it directly. Don't let it know you can see it. Some things are better left unacknowledged. I closed the journal and checked the calendar on the wall. October 16th. I'd arrived yesterday. Yesterday was day 1. Today was day 2, which meant in 5 days it would be day 7. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince myself that Marcus Webb had been a lonely, grieving man who'd let isolation unhinge him. That the rules were the product of a deteriorating mind, that there was nothing in Lake Superior except water and fish and the wrecks of old ships. But that night, lying in bed and listening to the lake, I couldn't stop thinking about Rule 7. Do not look out any window facing the water after dark on the 7th night. What had Marcus seen when he looked? And somewhere in the darkness outside, I thought I heard something that might have been waves against rock, or might have been something else. Something circling. Something waiting for day 7. Days 3 and 4 passed quietly. I fell into the rhythm of lighthouse keeping, morning weather reports, checking fuel levels, monitoring the automated systems, maintaining the log. The work was simple, almost meditative. Exactly what I needed. I explored the island during daylight hours, walking the rocky shoreline, examining tide pools, watching ships pass in the distance. The island was beautiful in its darkness, all gray stone and wind-bent trees, and the endless expanse of water. I tried not to think about Marcus Webb's journal, about the rules, about day 7. But the journal sat on the desk in the operations room, and every time I passed it, I felt its presence like a weight. On the evening of day 4, I gave in and read more of the earlier entries, the ones from before Marcus started deteriorating. What I found made the unease deepen. Marcus hadn't been the first to document the phenomenon. I pulled older journals in the cabinet, going back years, and found the pattern repeated. Different keepers, different handwriting, different decades, but every one of them had noted something about the 7th day. A journal from 2003, kept by someone named Patricia Oakes. Day 7. Something in the water tonight. Large. Circles the island after dark. Could be a whale, though behavior seems wrong. Stay inside to be safe. A journal from 1987. Keeper named Robert Chun. Day 14. Second occurrence. Same pattern as day 7. Something rises from deep water after sunset and circles the lighthouse until dawn. Have documented this for Coast Guard but received no response. Beginning to think they don't believe me. And further back, 1967, keeper named Thomas Morrison. Day 21. Third cycle. It learns. Each time it comes, it's different. Tries new approaches. The rules that worked before may not work forever, but I've found that certain procedures provide protection. Must maintain them precisely. Every keeper who'd stayed longer than a few weeks had eventually noted the pattern, and many of them had developed their own versions of rules. Procedures for staying safe on the 7th night. Marcus Webb's 8 rules were just the most recent iteration, refined through 25 cycles of trial and error. I sat in the operations room as the sun set on day 4, journals spread across the desk, and accepted what I'd been trying to deny. Something was out there. Multiple witnesses across decades, all describing the same phenomenon. Whatever it was, it followed a pattern, and that pattern came around every 7 days. The question was whether Marcus's rules actually worked, or whether they were just superstition, a way to feel control over something incomprehensible. I decided to test one rule early. Rule 3 said to walk the island's perimeter clockwise on the afternoon of day 7 and place stones at the 4 cardinal points. I could do that now on day 4 and see what happened. The next morning, day 5, I gathered for smooth stones from the beach and walked the island clockwise, using my compass to find true north, south, east, and west. At each cardinal point, I placed a stone, feeling slightly ridiculous but also cautious. If there was even a chance the rules worked, I wasn't going to risk ignoring them. The island's perimeter took about 40 minutes to walk. The whole time, I felt exposed, visible. The lake stretched endlessly in all directions, and I kept scanning the water for any sign of movement, any suggestion of something large beneath the surface. Nothing, just waves and sunlight and the occasional gull. I returned to the lighthouse and tried to focus on normal tasks. Check the generator, change an air filter, organize the supply closet. But my mind kept returning to the journals, to Marcus's final entry. He'd heard his daughter's voice, his dead daughter. I thought about David, about how I still sometimes heard his footsteps in our house, still expected him to walk through the door. Grief played tricks on the mind. Made you hear things, see things. Was that all this was? Dead keepers hearing voices of lost loved ones? But that didn't explain the consistency of the reports across decades, across different keepers with different losses. That night, day 5, I lay in bed listening to the lake with new awareness. Every sound seemed louder, more distinct. Waves against rock, wind through the lighthouse mechanism, the creaking of old wood settling. And at 3:47 a.m., I woke to something else. A sound I couldn't identify. Not quite scraping, not quite breathing. Rhythmic, deliberate, moving around the base of the lighthouse in a slow circle. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. The sound continued. Scrape, pause, like something heavy dragging itself across stone. Circling. I thought about Rule 7. Do not look out any window facing the water after dark. But it wasn't day 7 yet. It was only day 5. The rules shouldn't apply for 2 more nights. I got out of bed slowly, quietly, and moved the window. The bedroom faced east toward the water. Through the salt-stained glass, I could see moonlight on the lake, the silvered surface of the water, the dark shapes of rocks along the shore. The scraping sound continued below, out of sight. Something was circling the lighthouse. Right now, I pressed my face close to the glass, tried to see downward to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the sound. The angle was wrong. I could see the lake, the rocks in the distance, but not the base of the tower directly below. The scraping completed another circuit and stopped. Silence, just the normal sounds of wind and waves. I stood at the window for another 20 minutes, watching, listening. Nothing. Eventually, the cold drove me back to bed. I lay awake until dawn, unable to shake the feeling that something had been down there, that it had been real. Morning came gray and cold. I dressed quickly and went outside, circling the lighthouse on foot, examining the rocks at its base. That's when I found them. Wet marks on the stone, not watermarks from spray or waves. These were different. Thick, viscous trails, like something had dragged itself in the lake and across the rock. The marks led from the water's edge to the lighthouse foundation, circled the tower 3 times, then returned to the water. The trails were already dry in the morning air, but they were unmistakable. Something large had been here during the night. I knelt beside one of the marks and touched it. My fingers came away damp, sticky. The substance had a faint smell, like deep water and old stone. I checked my calendar again, counting carefully. Last night had been day 5. The 7th day was tomorrow night. According to the journals, according to Marcus's rules, the thing in the lake came every 7th day, not the 5th day, not randomly, every 7th day. But the marks were real, fresh, from last night. I went back inside and reread Marcus's later entries, the ones where his handwriting had started to break down. Day 168. It's learning, changing, testing. The stones don't always hold. The entity, whatever it was, had been coming on day 7 for decades. But Marcus had noticed it changing, evolving. What if it was starting to come on other days too? What if the pattern was shifting? I spent day 6 in a state of anxious preparation. I tested every light in the lighthouse, replaced bulbs, checked fuel levels in the generator. I covered the mirrors in the living quarters with bed sheets, the bathroom mirror, the decorative mirror in the hallway, even the reflective surface of the toaster. I felt foolish doing it, but I did it anyway. I checked the locks on all the doors, found a heavy wooden beam that could be used to bar the main entrance from inside. I made sure my emergency radio was charged and within reach, and I reread the 8 rules until I had them memorized. Rule 1, don't acknowledge it. Don't look directly at it. Don't let it know you can see it. Rule 2, keep every light burning from sunset to sunrise. Rule 3, stones at cardinal points before sunset. Already done. Rule 4, don't speak aloud from sunset to sunrise. Rule 5, cover mirrors and reflective surfaces. Done. Rule 6, keep the door barred, no matter what sounds I hear. Rule 7, don't look out windows facing the water after dark. Rule 8, if I hear my own voice outside, don't answer or investigate. As the sun began to set on day 6, I found myself pacing the operations room, nervous energy crackling through me. Tomorrow was day 7. Tomorrow night, if the pattern held, something would rise from the lake, and I would have to follow the rules exactly and hope they were enough. I made dinner but couldn't eat, tried to read but couldn't focus. Finally, I went to bed early, knowing I'd need rest for tomorrow. but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in the darkness, listening to the lake, waiting for any sound of scraping, any indication that the thing had come early again. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, just after midnight, my radio crackled. The emergency channel, usually silent except for Coast Guard check-ins. Static at first, then something else. A voice, broken, distant, but clear enough to understand. Sarah, my name, in a voice I recognized. Sarah, can you hear me? David's voice, my dead husband's voice, coming through the emergency radio. Sarah, I'm cold. I'm in the water. Please help me. My hand moved toward the radio before I could stop myself. Every instinct screamed to respond, to answer, to help. But I thought of Rule 8. If you hear your own voice call from outside, don't answer and don't investigate. This wasn't my voice, but it was a voice I knew, a voice I'd loved, a voice that had been silent for 2 years. Please, Sarah, I'm so cold. I can't find the shore. I can see the lighthouse. Please turn on the light. Please help me. I pulled my hand back from the radio, pressed it against my mouth to keep from responding. David was dead, had been dead for 2 years. This wasn't him. Couldn't be him. The radio crackled again. Why won't you answer? Sarah, don't you love me anymore? I reached over and turned off the radio, sat in the dark bedroom, shaking, tears streaming down my face. Tomorrow was day 7. The thing in the lake already knew my voice, already knew David's voice, already knew exactly what would hurt most. And tomorrow night, when it rose from the water and circled the lighthouse, it would use that knowledge against me. I didn't sleep at all that night, just lay in bed, watching the window, waiting for day 7 to arrive. Day 7 arrived gray and cold, the lake hidden beneath a low fog that pressed against the windows. I'd stayed awake all night after hearing David's voice on the radio, and now exhaustion made everything feel distant and unreal. I forced myself through morning routine, weather report to the Coast Guard, checking systems, eating breakfast I couldn't taste. The fog lifted by noon, revealing the lake stretching endlessly in all directions, beautiful and terrible at the same time. I knew what was coming tonight, and the waiting was almost worse than the actual event would be. By afternoon, I began the preparations in earnest. First, the lights. I went through the entire lighthouse and living quarters, testing every bulb, every fixture. The main lighthouse beacon was automated and reliable, but I checked it anyway, making sure the rotation mechanism was smooth, the Fresnel lens clean. Every lamp in the living quarters got fresh bulbs. I even set up battery-powered lanterns as backups in case the generator failed. Then I walked the perimeter again, checking the stones I'd placed at the cardinal points 2 days ago. The north stone was exactly where I'd left it, so were east and west. But the south stone, the one closest to the deepest water, had been moved. Not far, maybe 2 feet from its original position, but definitely moved. Something had pushed it out of alignment. I stood there staring at the displaced stone, feeling my pulse quicken. The stones were supposed to mark a boundary the entity couldn't cross. But if it could move them, could push them out of position, then the boundary was compromised. I picked up the south stone, smooth, gray, heavy in my hand, and placed it back at true south, according to my compass. Then I gathered more stones, larger ones, and built a small cairn around it to hold it in place. It probably wouldn't help, but I had to try something. The afternoon was slipping away, shadows growing longer across the rocks. I had maybe 2 hours until sunset. Back inside, I double-checked the mirrors, all covered. I tested the wooden beam I'd found to bar the main door. It fit perfectly into the iron brackets on either side of the frame. Once that beam was in place, nothing was getting through that door without breaking it down. I charged my phone, my flashlight, my backup radio. I filled water bottles and set them within reach. I laid out extra batteries, matches, candles. If the power failed, if the generator died, I needed to be able to keep light burning no matter what. An hour before sunset, I made a final walk around the exterior of the lighthouse, looking for anything unusual. The wet marks from day 5 were gone, dried and blown away by wind. The rocks were just rocks. The water was just water. Everything looked normal, but I knew what was coming. I'd read enough journal entries to know the pattern. After dark, something would rise from the deep water and circle the island. The keepers who'd followed the rules had survived. The ones who hadn't, like Marcus Webb, had disappeared. I went back inside and locked the door, then barred it with a heavy beam. The sun was touching the horizon now, the sky turning orange and purple. I had maybe 30 minutes of daylight left. I turned on every light in the living quarters, the operations room, even the lights on the exterior of the lighthouse that were normally only used for maintenance. The whole structure blazed with illumination, a beacon of light against the coming darkness. Then I sat in the operations room with Marcus's journal open in front of me, rereading his final entries as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Rule 4. Do not speak aloud from sunset to sunrise. From this moment until dawn, I had to stay silent. No matter what I heard, no matter what voices called to me, I couldn't respond. I closed my mouth and committed to silence. The first hour after dark was quiet. I sat at the desk, watching the clock, listening to the normal sounds of the lighthouse, the rotation mechanism of the beacon above, the hum of the generator, wind against the windows, waves on the rocks. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. I started to hope that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe the entity wouldn't come. Maybe Marcus had been wrong, had imagined the whole thing. Then at exactly 9:47 p.m., I know, because I was watching clock, I heard it. The scraping sound. The same sound from day 5, but louder now, closer. Something dragging itself from the water onto the rocks. I froze, every muscle tensing. The scraping continued, wet and heavy, moving up from the shoreline toward the lighthouse. It reached the foundation and began to circle, slow, methodical, deliberate. I could track its progress by sound alone as it moved around the base of the tower. Once around, twice, 3 times, just like the wet marks from day 5 had indicated. I sat perfectly still, fighting the urge to go to window, to look, to see what was making that sound. Rule 7. Do not look out any window facing the water after dark. Rule 1. Don't look directly at it. The scraping stopped. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. Not scraping now, but actual footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, walking around the lighthouse at ground level, right below where I sat. The footsteps circled once, twice, then stopped at the main door. I heard the door handle rattle. Testing it, finding it locked. The wooden beam I placed across the door creaked slightly as pressure was applied from outside. Then a voice. "Sarah, are you in there?" David's voice. Exactly as I remembered it. Warm, concerned, alive. "Sarah, it's me. I don't know how I got here. I was in the water, and now I'm here. I'm so cold. Please let me in." My hand moved toward the door beam before I could stop it. Every fiber of my being wanted to open that door, wanted to see him, wanted to believe that somehow, impossibly, David was alive and standing outside. But I pulled my hand back, pressed it against my mouth to keep from speaking. David was dead. I'd seen his body, attended his funeral, scattered his ashes in the ocean he'd loved. This wasn't him. "Sarah, I know you're in there. I can hear you breathing. Why won't you answer me?" The voice was so perfect. Every inflection, every cadence exactly right. If I closed my eyes, I could picture him standing there, confused and hurt that I wouldn't respond. Did I do something wrong? Are you angry with me? The door handle rattled again, harder this time. Please, I'm freezing. I just need to get warm. Just let me in for a few minutes. I squeezed my eyes shut, tears running down my face. Stay silent. Don't answer. Don't open the door. Rule 6. Keep the door barred, no matter what sounds you hear or what voices call to you. The voice outside changed, took on an edge of desperation. Sarah, there's something in the water. Something followed me. I can hear it coming back. Please, you have to let me in. It's going to get me. Please. I heard splashing, the sound of something moving through shallow water near the shore. Then David's voice again, panicked now. It's coming. Sarah, please, please don't let it get me. Footsteps running along the rocks, moving away from the door. A scream, David's scream, cut short. Silence. I sat at the desk, shaking, tears streaming down my face, hands pressed over my mouth to hold in the sobs that wanted to escape. It wasn't real. David wasn't out there. The thing in the lake was using his voice, his memory, trying to make me break the rules, try and make me open the door, or speak, or look. 10 minutes passed in silence. Then the footsteps returned. Slower now, heavier. They circled the lighthouse again, and this time I could hear something else, a wet, dragging sound, like something was pulling itself along. The footsteps stopped at each window, pausing, as if whatever was out there was looking in, testing, searching. When the sounds reached the east window, the one in the bedroom, facing the water, I heard a new sound. Tapping. Fingernails against glass. Tap, tap, tap. Patient, persistent. Then David's voice again, but different this time. Flatter, less human. I can see you in there, Sarah, sitting at the desk. Try not to look. Try not to listen. The voice was right outside the window now, maybe 10 feet from where I sat. You're doing well, following all the rules. Marcus followed the rules too. For 25 cycles, he never broke them, until he did. The tapping continued, nails on glass, irregular and unsettling. Do you know what Marcus saw when he looked? Do you want to know what I really am? Every instinct screamed at me to look, to see, to confirm what was outside that window. But I kept my eyes fixed on the desk, on Marcus's journal, on anything except that window. His daughter wasn't really there, of course. I just wore her shape, spoke with her voice, the same way I'm wearing David's voice now. But when Marcus looked, when he really looked, he saw me, saw what I actually am beneath the borrowed forms. The voice paused, the tapping stopped, and then he understood why the rules exist, why you must never look directly, why acknowledgement changes everything. I wanted to cover my ears, but was afraid that any movement, any acknowledgement that I heard it, would be breaking the rules somehow. So I sat perfectly still, silent, staring at the desk. I've been here for a very long time, Sarah. Before the lighthouse, before the ships, before humans came to these waters. This lake is deep, dark, cold, and lonely, so very lonely. The voice took on something that might have been sadness. Every 7 days, I rise to the surface. I circle the lighthouse. I call out to whoever is here, and they hide from me, follow their rules, stay inside their light, afraid. Marcus was afraid too, but he was also curious. And grief makes people curious about death, doesn't it? Makes them willing to look at things they shouldn't. He wanted to see his daughter one more time, even if he knew it wasn't really her. So he looked. The tapping resumed, harder now. Do you want to know what happened to him, Sarah? He's still here, part of the lake now, part of me. All the keepers who looked, who broke the rules, who acknowledged what they saw, they're all still here, together, not alone anymore. I thought about Marcus's final entry, about how he'd heard his daughter's voice. about how he'd wanted to see her one more time, about how the next page had been blank. You're stronger than Marcus was. You haven't looked, haven't spoken. You're following every rule perfectly. The voice moved away from the window, footsteps circling back toward the door. But you'll break eventually. They always do. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not for many cycles. But grief is patient, Sarah. And so am I. The footsteps descended from the lighthouse foundation back toward the water. I heard the scraping sound again, something heavy dragging itself across rocks and into the lake. Splash, then silence. I sat frozen at the desk, not trusting the silence, waiting for another sound, another test. The clock showed 11:34 p.m., hours until sunrise, hours until I could speak, could move, could look out the windows. I stayed at the desk all night, watching the clock, listening to the building. Around 2 a.m., I heard the scraping again, another circle around the lighthouse. Around 4 a.m., David's voice called from the rocks, begging me to help him. Around 5 a.m., something scratched at the door, patient and persistent. But I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't look, just sat in the light, surrounded by generators and batteries and the rules that Marcus Webb had learned through 25 cycles of terror. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering through windows. When the sun finally cleared the horizon, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to move, to speak. Day 1. I said aloud, my voice hoarse from hours of silence. The cycle had begun again. I'd survived the 7th day. But there would be another 7th day in 6 more days. And another after that. And another. And I thought about what the voice had said, about how grief makes people curious about death, about how everyone breaks eventually. I went to the window. I'd refused to look out the night before. In the morning light, I could see the rocks, the water, the normal landscape of the island. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. But at the base of the lighthouse, barely visible from this angle, I could see fresh wet marks on the stone. The thing had been there. It had been real. I walked outside in the cold morning air and examined the marks. They were already drying, but still visible. And among them, I found something new. One of my stones from the cardinal points. The south stone I'd reset yesterday. It wasn't the shore anymore. It was sitting on the lighthouse doorstep, moved from its position, placed where I'd have to see it. A message, a reminder. The boundary hadn't held. And in 6 days, it would be day 7 again. The second cycle, days 1 through 6, passed in a haze of exhaustion and hypervigilance. I barely slept, startled awake by every sound that might be scraping, might be footsteps, might be David's voice calling from the rocks. During daylight hours, I walked the island compulsively, checking and rechecking the cardinal point stones, examining the shoreline for any sign of disturbance. The stones kept moving, not every day, but often enough to be deliberate. I'd place them carefully at true north, south, east, and west, and the next morning one would be shifted a few feet, or moved to a different location entirely, or once, stacked with other stones in a small cairn at the water's edge. The entity was testing me, showing me that the boundaries I tried to establish were meaningless. I radioed the Coast Guard for my weekly check-in on day 4 of the second cycle, and the operator asked if everything was okay. I must have sounded off, stressed, just tired, I said, not sleeping well. Isolation gets to people, the operator said. Previous keeper had the same issue. If you need to cut the assignment short, we can arrange pickup. I thought about leaving, about getting on a resupply boat when it came in 2 weeks, and never coming back. But something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the same curiosity that had doomed Marcus Webb. Or maybe it was something else. The entity's voice echoing in my head, telling me about loneliness, about the deep cold dark of the lake, about how all the keepers who'd look were still here, together, not alone anymore. Day 7 of the second cycle arrived too quickly. I went through the same preparations, testing lights, covering mirrors, barring the door. This time I knew what to expect. Knew the scraping would start around 9:47 p.m. Knew David's voice would call from outside. Knew I'd have to sit in silence for hours while the entity circled and tested and tried to make me break. But knowing didn't make it easier. Sunset came, and I committed to silence. The first hour was quiet. Then, right on schedule, the scraping began. The thing rose from the water and dragged itself onto the rocks, circling the lighthouse exactly as before. But this time, the pattern changed. Instead of circling 3 times and stopping at the door, it circled 7 times. 7 slow, deliberate circuits around the foundation. Then the footsteps started, but they didn't stop at the door. They climbed. I heard them ascending the exterior of the lighthouse tower, the metal maintenance ladder that ran up the outside. Heavy footsteps on metal rungs, climbing higher and higher. The sound rose past the living quarters, past the operations room, up toward the light room at the top of the tower. I sat frozen at the desk, tracking the sound by ear. The footsteps reached the top of the ladder, then stopped. Silence for maybe a minute, then something else. Tapping on the glass of the light room, 70 feet above where I sat. The Fresnel lens was up there, rotating, sending its beam across the dark water. Whatever was outside was tapping on the glass that housed the light itself. Sarah, David's voice, but coming from above now, from the top of the tower, muffled by distance and walls, but still clear enough to understand. I can see everything from up here. The whole lake. It's beautiful. Come look. The tapping continued, rhythmic and patient. I can see the mainland. I can see the lights of the towns. I can see our house, Sarah, the house we bought together. Someone else lives there now. I kept my eyes fixed on the desk, hands clenched into fists. Don't respond. Don't look. Don't acknowledge. There's someone in our bedroom, in our bed, living the life we should have had together. Doesn't that make you angry? The tapping got louder, more insistent. They're forgetting you, Sarah. Your friends, your family. They've moved on. You're out here alone, hiding from me, and they're moving on like you never existed. I felt tears running down my face, but stayed silent, stayed still. The voice above shifted, took on the flat quality it had used before, the inhuman tone. You're doing well, better than most, but you're wondering, aren't you? Wondering what I really am, what Marcus saw, what all of them saw when they looked. The tapping stopped. I could show you. All you have to do is come up here, come to the light room, and look. Just once, just to know. Footsteps on the ladder again, descending this time, slow and heavy, coming down from the tower. They reached ground level and resumed circling, but closer now to the living quarters, to the windows I was refusing to look through. The rules are interesting, Sarah. They work after fashion. They keep you safe from direct contact, but they don't keep me away. They just keep you ignorant, blind, and ignorance is its own kind of prison. The footsteps stopped at the east window again, the bedroom window. I rise every 7th day whether you acknowledge me or not. I've been doing it for longer than your species has had language. The lighthouse is new. The rules are new. But I am old as the lake itself. Older, tapping on the glass, gentle this time, almost tentative. Do you know what it's like to be aware, to be conscious, but alone? Completely alone? For thousands of years? The lake is deep and dark and cold. There is nothing else here. Nothing but stone and water and the pressure of the depths. And me. The voice took on that quality of sadness again. The ships started coming. Then the lighthouse. Then the keepers. Finally, company. Finally, voices. Finally, the possibility of not being alone. But you all hide from me. Follow your rules. Keep your lights burning. Afraid. I don't want to hurt you, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt any of them. I just want to not be alone, to have someone see me, really see me, to have someone stay. The tapping stopped. The footsteps moved away from the window. But if you won't look willingly, then I'll wait. Grief is patient. Loneliness is patient. And eventually, everyone wants to see their dead again badly enough to break the rules. The scraping sound returned, something heavy dragging back toward the water. But before it reached the shoreline, I heard David's voice one more time. I love you, Sarah. I always loved you. Even now, even like this. Then splash and silence. I sat at the desk until dawn, shaking, crying, but never speaking, never looking. When the sun rose, I allowed myself to move, to check the windows, to see what marks the entity had left. The wet trail circled the lighthouse 7 times, just as the scraping had suggested. But there was something else. At the base of the exterior maintenance ladder, pressed into the damp stone, was a handprint, large, too large to be human, with too many fingers arranged in the wrong configuration, but recognizable as a hand nonetheless. A hand that had climbed the ladder to the light room and tapped on the glass. I spent the next cycle 3, researching. I'd been reading Marcus's journal, and the journals of keepers who'd survived, who'd followed the rules successfully. But I needed to understand the ones who hadn't survived, the ones who'd disappeared. I went through the cabinet systematically, pulling out every journal, looking for final entries, for clues about what had happened to keepers who'd broken the rules. What I found was a pattern. The keepers who disappeared always broke the same rule, Rule 7. They looked, every single one of them, in their final entries, mentioned looking out a window facing the water on the 7th night. Marcus. I want to see her one more time. Patricia Oakes, 2003. I need to know what's out there. Need to see it with my own eyes. Robert Chun, 1987. If I'm going to be afraid of it, I should at least know what it looks like. Thomas Morrison, 1967. It's been calling my brother's name for 3 cycles now. Tonight, I'm going to look. I need to know if it's really him. They all looked, and the next day, their journals ended. No more entries. No indication of what they saw or what happened after. Just blank pages. And then a new keeper arriving weeks or months later, finding the journal and starting their own entries. I thought about what the entity had said about Marcus, seeing what it really was beneath the borrowed forms, about how acknowledgement changed everything. What did that mean? What happened when you looked? Did it kill you? Take you? Transform you into something else? The entity had said the disappeared keepers were still here, part of the lake now, part of me. What did that mean? I was on day 5 of cycle 3, when the resupply boat arrived. The same ferry captain who dropped me off 6 weeks ago, bringing fresh food, propane mail. He helped me unload supplies onto the dock, then paused before heading back to his boat. You look rough, he said. Not sleeping. Not much, I admitted. It was the first real conversation I'd had in weeks, and my voice sounded strange. Have you thought about cutting the assignment short? No shame in it. This kind of isolation isn't for everyone. I thought about leaving, packing my bags, getting on that boat, returning to the mainland and a normal life. But I looked at the lighthouse behind me, at the lake stretching endlessly in all directions, and I knew I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding what was happening here. I'm staying, I said. The captain shrugged. Your choice. Next resupply is in 4 weeks. You change your mind before then, use the emergency radio. After he left, I sat on the dock and went through the mail he brought. Bills forwarded from my old address. A postcard from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. and at the bottom of the stack, an envelope with no return address. Postmarked from a town I'd never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky letters. Dear Keeper, I was stationed at Redemption Light in 1999. Served 4 months before I couldn't take it anymore. I broke on the 14th day. Second cycle, I looked. I saw what it really is. And I've regretted it every day for the last 26 years. You think the rules protect you, but they're really protecting it. From you. From being seen. If you look, if you really see what's under the borrowed shapes, everything changes. You can never unsee it. You can never unknow what you learn. My advice, leave now. Don't wait. Don't try to understand. Just leave while you still can. JM. I read the letter 3 times, then looked at the postmark again. The town didn't exist on any map I could find, but JM had been a keeper here, had looked, had seen, and was still alive 26 years later, still haunted by whatever they'd witnessed. That meant looking didn't necessarily kill you, didn't necessarily mean being taken by the entity, but it changed you, changed everything. I thought about the pattern. Every 7th day, the entity rose, used the voices of the dead to tempt the living, and eventually grief and curiosity overcame fear, and the keeper looked, not because they wanted to die, but because they wanted to understand, wanted to see their lost loved ones one more time, even if they knew it wasn't real. Day 7 of cycle 3 came. I followed the same routine, lights, mirrors, stones, silence. But this time, as I sat at the desk waiting for scraping to start, I made a decision. I wasn't going to look, not tonight, but I was going to pay closer attention, to listen more carefully, to try to understand what the entity was, what it wanted, why it kept rising every 7 days. The scraping started at 9:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. 7 circles around the lighthouse. Footsteps climbing the exterior ladder to the light room, tapping on the glass. Then David's voice from above. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something about the night I died. I tensed. The entity had used David's voice before, but never like this. Never offering information. You think it was an aneurysm. Sudden. Painless. Nothing you could have prevented. The voice paused. But what if I told you it wasn't? What if there was more to it? My heart was hammering. This was a new tactic, a new approach, offering answers instead of just calling for help. Come to the window. Sarah, look out at the lake. I'll show you what really happened. I'll show you everything. I stayed at the desk, hands gripping the edge until my knuckles went white. Don't look. Don't respond. Don't break the rules. You want to know, don't you? You've always wondered, always questioned, if you'd woken up sooner, if you'd noticed something was wrong, if you could have saved me. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Look, just once, and I'll tell you everything. About that night, about what comes after, about why I'm here now, in this lake, speaking through this ancient thing. Look, Sarah, please, just look. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, and held firm. Don't look, don't look, don't look. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then footsteps descending the ladder, slow and heavy. When they reached ground level, they didn't circle. They just stopped. And the voice spoke again, but different now. Colder. You're stronger than I thought. But that just means you'll fall harder when you finally break. And you will break. Sarah, they all do. Then the scraping sound, dragging back to the water. Splash. Silence. I survived cycle 3, but barely. And I knew the ending was right. Everyone broke eventually. The question was how many cycles I had left before grief and loneliness and the need to understand finally overcame my fear. Before I looked out that window and saw what all the others had seen. before I became one more disappeared keeper, one more name in the journals, one more person who'd stayed too long at Redemption Light. Cycles 4 and 5 blurred together. The pattern was consistent now. Every 7th day, the entity rose, circled, climbed, tapped, spoke with David's voice, offered revelations, tried to make me look. And every 7th night, I sat at the desk in silence, following the rules, surviving until dawn. But something was changing, not with the entity. With me, I was sleeping less, eating less. My weekly radio check-ins with the Coast Guard were getting shorter, my responses more clipped. I caught myself standing at windows during the day, staring out at the water, wondering what was down there in the deep, wondering what Marcus had seen, what Jam had seen, what all of them had seen that had changed them forever. On day 3 of Cycle 6, I made a mistake. The resupply boat was late. A storm had delayed it by a week. My fuel reserves were running low. Not critically low, but low enough that I started doing calculations. The generator consumed fuel at a steady rate. I had enough to run it continuously for another 12 days. But day 7 of Cycle 6 was in 4 days. If I ran every light in the lighthouse from sunset to sunrise as Rule 2 required, I'd burn through fuel faster. I might not have enough to last until the next resupply. I sat in the operations room, staring at the fuel gauge, doing the math over and over. I could ration the lights, turn off non-essential ones, keep the main beacon running, and maybe 1 or 2 lamps in the living quarters. That would stretch my fuel until the boat arrived. Or I could follow Rule 2 exactly, every light burning, and risk running out of fuel completely, leaving myself in darkness on a future 7th night with no protection at all. It was an impossible choice. Break the rules now when I had some control, or follow them and potentially be forced to break them later with no options left. I chose rationing. On day 7 of Cycle 6, I kept the main lighthouse beacon running and 2 lamps in the operations room, but I turned off the exterior maintenance lights, the lights in the bedroom, the lights in the kitchen. The living quarters were dim, shadowy, not the blazing illumination of previous cycles. When the scraping started at 9:47 p.m., I knew immediately it was different. The circles around the lighthouse were faster, more aggressive. The entity circled not 7 times, but 12 times. The scraping sound urgent, almost excited. The footsteps didn't climb the ladder this time. They stayed at ground level, moving from window to window, testing, probing. I heard tapping at the kitchen window. Dark now, no light burning. Tapping at the bedroom window. Dark. The entity was checking which areas had gone dark, which parts of my protection had failed. Then David's voice, but not from outside, from inside, from the darkened kitchen. You broke the rules, Sarah. Not all the lights are burning. I felt ice run down my spine. The voice was inside the living quarters. Inside with me. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think the darkness wouldn't invite me closer? Footsteps in the kitchen, slow and deliberate, moving toward the operations room where I sat. I wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The whole lighthouse was my cage. The rules exist for a reason. Light keeps me at a distance. Darkness lets me in. The footsteps reached the doorway between the kitchen and operations room. I could see the darkened kitchen beyond, shadows shifting. Something was standing in that doorway. Something tall. Look at me, Sarah. I'm right here, right in front of you. No window between us now. No glass. No barrier. Just look. I kept my eyes fixed on the desk, on Marcus's journal, on anything except that doorway. Rule 1, don't look directly at it. Rule 7, don't look out windows facing the water. But the rules didn't say anything about what to do when it got inside. You're so close to understanding, so close to seeing. Why do you resist? The voice was directly in front of me now, on the other side of the desk. If I looked up, I would see it. Would see what it really was beneath David's voice. All the others looked eventually. Marcus looked. JM looked. Patricia and Robert and Thomas. They all looked, and they understood. They saw what I am, what I've been for so long, what I could be for you. A sound like breathing, but wrong. Too wet, too deep. I'm not what you think. Not a monster. Not evil. Just lonely. So lonely that I've existed in that loneliness for millennia, and the weight of it has changed me into something you'd call monstrous. But I wasn't always this way. The breathing continued. I was like you once. Human. That was so long ago, I barely remember what it felt like. But I remember the loneliness, the isolation, the cold. I remember choosing to stay, to become what the lake needed, to be its guardian, its awareness. And I remember the exact moment I stopped being human and became this. Silence. Then Marcus made that choice too, and Jam almost did, but ran before the transformation completed. That's why they're still alive, still human, but haunted. They saw what the choice entailed and couldn't commit. But Marcus committed. He's here with me now, part of the lake, part of me, not alone anymore. The presence moved around the desk, circling me like it circled the lighthouse. I'm offering you the same choice, Sarah. Look, see, understand, and then decide. You can stay in your light, following your rules, alone in your grief. Or you can look and see what comes after. See David again. Really see him. Not his voice, not a memory. Him. What's left of him. What the lake has preserved. My hands were shaking. I wanted so desperately to look, to see, to understand, to see David again, even if he was something else now, even if it meant becoming something else myself. But I thought about JM's letter. You can never unsee it. You can never unknow what you learn. And I kept my eyes down. The present stayed close for another hour, breathing, waiting. Then finally, you're stronger than I expected, but you'll run out of fuel completely in 3 more cycles. And then, Sarah, there will be no light to hide in, no rules to follow, just darkness, and me, and the choice you'll have to make. The footsteps retreated back through the kitchen. I heard the scraping sound descending from the living quarters to the rocks, then into the water. Splash. Silence. When dawn came, I inspected the lighthouse. The kitchen window, the dark window, had marks on it. Not outside marks. Inside marks. Like something had pressed against the glass from within the room, trying to get out, or trying to remind me it had been there. I radioed the Coast Guard that morning and told them I needed emergency resupply. Fuel was critical. The operator said a boat would come within 48 hours. It arrived on day 2 of Cycle 7, bringing fuel, food, and a message from my supervisor. This is the second emergency resupply we've had to arrange for you. The previous keeper had similar issues. If you're unable to manage supplies effectively, we may need to reconsider your posting. I signed for delivery and didn't explain that the fuel wasn't mismanaged. It was a choice between following rules that kept me alive and conserving resources. How do you explain that to someone who doesn't believe in the entity? The fuel bought me time, bought me more cycles of light and protection. But I knew it was temporary. The entity had been right. Eventually, supplies would fail, or I would fail, or the rules wouldn't be enough anymore. Cycle 7 passed. Cycle 8. Cycle 9. Each 7th night, the same pattern. Scraping, circling, climbing, tapping. David's voice offering revelations and choices and promises. Each dawn, I emerged shaky and exhausted but alive. On day 4 of Cycle 10, I found something that changed everything. I was going through the oldest journals in the cabinet, the ones from the 1940s and 50s, looking for any information about keepers who'd survived long-term, who'd managed to follow the rules for years instead of months. What I found was a journal from 1952. Keeper named Elizabeth Harrow. She'd served at Redemption Light for 6 years, the longest tenure of any keeper I'd seen recorded. Her entries were detailed, methodical, and she'd clearly developed an understanding of the entity that went beyond simple survival. Her final entries were dated February 1958. I followed the rules for 72 cycles. 72 seventh nights of hiding, of not looking, of staying in the light. But I've also been watching, learning. The entity rises every 7th day like clockwork, but the timing isn't random. It corresponds to the lunar cycle. Every 7th day from the new moon. The pattern is astronomical, not arbitrary. This suggests the entity isn't purely supernatural. It's bound by natural forces, by the rhythm of the earth and moon and lake. And if it's bound by natural forces, it can potentially be negotiated with, not as a monster, but as a natural phenomenon, like the tides, like the seasons. On my next cycle, cycle 73, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to speak to it, not to beg, not to run, but to negotiate, to see if there's a way to coexist that doesn't require hiding or transformation. I'll update this journal after the 7th night. YH. The next entry was in different handwriting. A new keeper, March 1958, found this journal when I arrived. Previous keeper Elizabeth Harrow is listed as missing. No sign of her in the lighthouse or on the island. Beginning my tenure. Robert Mills. Elizabeth had tried to negotiate and had disappeared. But her observation about the lunar cycle was interesting. I checked the calendar against my own cycles. She was right. Every 7th day fell on a specific lunar phase. The entity wasn't random. It was following natural patterns, rising and fall with the moon's pull on the lake. If it was bound by natural forces, maybe it could be understood through natural means. Maybe the rules weren't about supernatural protection, but about managing a natural phenomenon that humans didn't have the framework to comprehend. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could find about Lake Superior, its depth, its temperature, its unique properties. Superior was the deepest of the Great Lakes, with a maximum depth of over 1,300 feet. The water was cold enough year-round to preserve bodies indefinitely, which was why shipwreck victims were often never found. The lake had unique acoustic properties, strange currents, areas where compasses didn't work correctly. It was a massive, ancient body of water with properties science still didn't fully understand. What if the entity wasn't supernatural at all? What if it was something natural that had evolved in the deep, cold waters, something so outside human experience that we called it supernatural because we had no other framework? Day 7 of Cycle 10 arrived. I prepared as usual, lights, mirrors, stone, silence. But this time, I also prepared something else. I wrote a note, brief and direct, and placed it on the exterior maintenance ladder where the entity would find it when it climbed. I want to understand. Not to see you, not to join you, just to understand what you are and what you need. Can we communicate without me breaking the rules? SC. Then I waited. The scraping started at 9:47 p.m. 7 circles. Footsteps on the ladder. A pause, longer than usual, at the spot where I'd left a note. Then the footsteps continued to the light room, and the tapping began. But this time, David's voice didn't call from above. Instead, I heard something else. A voice I didn't recognize, old and tired. Finally, someone who asks instead of hides. Come to the light room. Sarah, I'll show you. Not my true form. That requires looking directly. But I'll show you how to understand without seeing. How to communicate without transformation. Come up. I promise you'll remain yourself. I promise you'll be able to leave. Just come up and let me show you what I am. I sat at the desk, staring at the ceiling, hearing the voice echo down from the light room 70 feet above. Every instinct told me it was a trap, That climbing to the light room meant breaking rules, meant putting myself in direct contact with the entity. But the voice hadn't been David's. It had been something else, older, more genuine. And for the first time in 10 cycles, the entity was offering communication instead of manipulation. I thought about Elizabeth Harrow, who tried to negotiate and disappeared, but she tried to speak directly to it, to engage with it as it circled outside. She hadn't set terms, hadn't asked for communication on her own conditions. Maybe that was the difference. I stood up slowly, took a breath, and made a decision. I would go to the light room, but I wouldn't look at the entity directly. I would keep my eyes on the lens, on the light, on anything except the windows. I would listen, but I wouldn't break Rule 7. I climbed the metal stairs inside the tower, each step echoing an enclosed space. The spiral staircase wound upward through darkness, my flashlight the only illumination. When I reached the top, I pushed open a hatch to the light room. The space was small, circular, dominated by the massive Fresnel lens that rotated slowly, sending its beam across the dark water. The walls were glass, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a 360-degree view of the lake. I kept my eyes fixed on the lens, on the prisms and the light source at its center. The voice spoke again, coming from just outside the glass. "Thank you for coming. I know this breaks your sense of safety, but I promise you I mean no harm tonight." I stayed silent. Rule 4, don't speak from sunset to sunrise. Even up here, even in this unprecedented situation, I wouldn't break that rule. You asked what I am. That's a question I've been trying to answer for a very long time. I was human once, as I said. In 1847, I was a surveyor mapping the lake. My name was Thomas Whitmore. I drowned when my boat capsized in a storm. The voice paused, and I heard something that might have been the sound of water dripping, but I didn't die. Not completely. The lake is old, Sarah, ancient, and it's aware in ways that humans don't understand. It preserved me, changed me, made me part of itself. I became its consciousness, its voice, its way of reaching out to the world above. I wanted to ask questions, to demand explanations, but I kept my silence and my eyes on the light. For years, I was alone in the deep, just me in the cold and the dark. Then ships started coming. I would rise to see them, to be near other humans again. But they feared me, fled from me. I learned that my appearance had changed, that I was no longer what I had been. The voice shifted, took on a note of sadness. The lighthouse was built in 1902. Finally, a permanent presence. Finally, people who stayed. I rose to greet the first keeper, but he ran. Died of fear, I think, though the records say heart failure. After that, I learned to be more careful, to approach slowly, to use voices that wouldn't frighten. But even then, I was alone. The seventh day isn't random. It's when the lunar pull is strongest, when the boundary between the deep water and the surface is thinnest. Those are the only days I can rise, the only days I can reach out. The rest of the time, I'm below in the cold, aware but unable to connect. I thought about what this meant. The entity, Thomas, was malevolent. He was isolated, trapped in a form and a cycle he hadn't chosen, desperately lonely, reaching out the only way he knew how. You asked what I need. I need to not be alone. For one night every 7 days, I need to know there's someone else who knows I exist, who acknowledges me. The keepers who looked, who saw me, they made a choice. They chose to stay, to become like me, to share the burden of awareness. Marcus Webb chose that. He saw his daughter because I showed him that she was here too, drowned in a boating accident years ago, preserved by the lake just as I was. He chose to join her. My heart clenched. If what Thomas said was true, then the entity hadn't taken Marcus. Marcus had chosen to stay, chosen to be with his daughter, even if it meant becoming something else. But that's not the only choice, Thomas continued. JM looked and saw but didn't stay. They saw what I am, understood the truth, and chose to leave. It haunted them because they understood the loneliness they were leaving me to, but they made their choice and I let them go. I always let them go if they choose to leave. He paused. You don't have to look, Sarah. You don't have to see me or join me, but I want you to understand that I'm not your enemy. I'm just someone who's been alone for a very long time. And every seventh night, I rise hoping that this time, someone will choose to stay. Not because I'm forcing them, but because they understand. I stood in the light room, eyes still fixed on the lens, processing this. If Thomas was telling the truth, and something about the old, tired quality of his voice made me think he was, then the rules weren't protecting me from a monster. They were protecting me from a choice. The choice to see, to understand fully, and to decide whether to stay or go. You're wondering if you can trust me, Thomas said. You're wondering if this is just another manipulation. I don't know how to prove my honesty except to say this. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to return to the deep. And I'm going to release you from the cycle. You won't have to hide anymore. You won't have to follow the rules. On the seventh night, I'll still rise, but I won't approach the lighthouse. I'll give you the choice to seek me out if you want to understand more, or to ignore me if you want peace. I felt tears running down my face, though I wasn't sure why. Relief, maybe, or grief for Thomas, for Marcus, for all the lonely souls the lake had preserved. But I ask one thing, Thomas continued. Leave something in the journals. Leave an account of this conversation. Let the next keeper know that the rules exist not because I'm dangerous, but because the truth is dangerous. Because seeing what I am, understanding what the lake does, requires making a choice no one should have to make. Let them know they can follow the rules and be safe, or they can seek me out and understand, but either way, they have a choice. The voice faded. I heard the sound of water, of something heavy sliding back into the lake, and then silence. I stood in the light room for a long time, watching the lens rotate, the beam sweeping across the dark water. When I finally descended back to the living quarters, the sun was beginning to rise. Day 1 of cycle 11. I went outside and checked the maintenance ladder where I'd left my note. It was gone, but in its place was something else, a small object wrapped in waterproof cloth. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a copper compass, old and tarnished, the kind a surveyor would have used in 1847. Thomas Whitmore's compass. A gift, or maybe a confirmation that everything he'd said was true. The next 7 days passed quietly. I followed my normal routines, weather reports, maintenance, walks around the island. I didn't prepare for the seventh night, didn't test lights or cover mirrors or bar the door. I wanted to see if Thomas would keep his word. Day 7 of cycle 11 arrived. I stayed up, sitting in the operations room with all the lights off except one small lamp. Sunset came and went. 9:47 p.m. passed without the sound of scraping. I waited until midnight, then walked outside onto the rocks. The lake was calm, the sky clear. I could see stars reflected in the water. And far out, maybe half a mile from shore, I saw something rise from the lake. A shape, dark against the water, too large to be any natural creature. It surfaced, remained still for a moment, then submerged again. It didn't approach, didn't circle, just rose once, as if to say, I'm here, and then returned to the deep. Thomas had kept his word. Over the next cycles, the pattern continued. Every seventh night, something would rise far from shore, surface briefly, then descend, never approaching, never threatening, just acknowledging its existence and mine. I served out the rest of my 6-month contract. When the Coast Guard boat came to pick me up in April, I packed my belongings and prepared to leave. But before I left, I sat down with Marcus Webb's journal and added a final entry. To the next keeper, the entity in the lake is real. The rules work, but they're not what you think. You can follow them and be safe, or you can choose to understand. Either way, know that you're not dealing with a monster. You're dealing with loneliness, so profound it's become something else. Something neither alive nor dead. Something that just wants to not be alone. The choice of how to respond is yours. Choose wisely. And if you choose to leave with compassion, not fear. Sarah Chun, April 2024 inch. I left the journal in the operations room cabinet, along with Thomas Whitmore's compass. Then I boarded the ferry and left Redemption Island behind. The ferry captain asked if I'd had a good tenure. Quiet, I said. Lonely, but I learned a lot. He nodded. Most people don't last 6 months out there. You did well. As we crossed back to the mainland, I looked back at the lighthouse, at the white tower rising from the rocks. I thought about Thomas, alone in the deep, about Marcus, who'd chosen to join him, about all the keepers who'd faced the same choice over the decades. I'd survived by understanding rather than hiding, by listening rather than running, and I'd left with something the others hadn't. Compassion for the entity instead of just fear. 6 months later, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting from the journal I'd read. Elizabeth Harrow, the keeper from 1952 who'd supposedly disappeared. Dear Sarah, I read your entry in the journal. Thank you for understanding what so many others couldn't. I didn't disappear in 1958. I chose to leave after negotiating with Thomas. He let me go on the condition that I never speak of what I'd seen, never try to convince others of the truth. But your entry released me from that promise. You saw the truth yourself and wrote it down. Now others can choose with knowledge rather than fear. I'm old now, 89, but I've lived a full life, unburdened by the lake's call because I understood and was allowed to leave. You've done the same. Live well, Elizabeth Harrow. I folded the letter and put it away. Thought about the lighthouse, about Thomas rising every 7th night to surface briefly, and remember what it was like to not be alone. I never went back to Redemption Island, but sometimes, on nights when the moon is new and the pull is strong, I think about the deep cold water of Lake Superior, about what's preserved down there in the dark, about the choice between loneliness and transformation. And I hope that someday another keeper will make the choice Thomas is waiting for, not out of fear or grief, but out of understanding. The choice to see, to know, and maybe, just maybe, to stay. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Because sometimes the greatest act of compassion is choosing to share someone's loneliness, even if it costs you everything.